At the bar, you see a cloaked, hunched-over man. He wears a crown of bone and blade, surrounded by 3 sentient rings of fire. His arm is made of steel.
Who else is in this tavern?
There's a goblin named Sam Smorkle.
3 sentient rings of fire? I want to talk to Sam Smorkle.
This old tweet by cartoonist Beanie Tuesday apparently hit a collective nerve, with even Matt Mercer saying, "I feel this so hard." D&D players and DMs alike agree. This is a super relatable tweet. But why? Because it happens a lot. Stop me if this sounds familiar. The DM here has sat down to play a game with a, let's say, certain aesthetic. They're leaning hard into the stereotype of DM as unpublished novelist. They've got an edgy badass OC, Do Not Steal, who is in a position to catch the players and load them onto a railroad car the DM has probably spent all night for the last 5 weeks working on. They're probably thinking of it like a high-concept movie or Netflix original. The DM's desired tone is probably a gritty sort of high fantasy, played with the appropriate gravitas. Maybe a bit of grimdark, festooned with fantastical trappings. There will be moments of levity, but in a way that respects the seriousness of the world. This is a narrative of grand quests and high stakes that probably concludes with an epic final battle to save reality itself from certain annihilation. There will be elaborate set pieces, there will be deep lore. You can imagine this DM might have a map ready they've spent hours painting in Photoshop. Pages upon pages of write-ups about dozens of nations and political factions and secret societies and history and culture inspired by real-world history. What the DM wants from the players is to be heroes in this unpublished novel of theirs, and to roleplay their characters as fully realized people who react as a real person would, bearing the crushing burden of the world on their shoulders with fear, anxiety, self-doubt, and heroic resolve. What the DM offers in return is that it's going to be so cool, friends! These twists will blow your minds! Meanwhile, the players are playing an absurdist slice-of-life comedy about blowing in the wind. They want to romp around with a fun goblin with a silly name. They want to play pranks involving pumpkins and dress up to infiltrate a noble gala so they can steal the cakes. They want to tell D's nuts jokes. They want to laugh. Maybe they want to find a funny way of using their spells and abilities to produce outcomes the developers didn't intend. Maybe they're going to start a gardening business using the Mold Earth cantrip or the Plant Growth spell. Maybe they're going to use the Fabricate spell to kickstart an industrial revolution, or find a way to turn farmed slimes and grung sweat into the hot new brand of soft drink. Refreshing. The world they expect is probably one that's fundamentally modern, but with a thin veneer of fantasy pasted over it. There's going to be a post office, a mayor, a general store, colleges with majors, joint stock corporations, sandwiches, cola that comes in bottles. People will unironically use the word cringe in character. What the players want from the DM is to present and maintain a comfortable, legible, and familiar but fantastical sandbox in which they can get caught up in wacky hijinks, organically giving rise to moments of humor and whimsy, but don't think too hard about it. What they offer to the DM in return is the opportunity to participate in that fun, without thinking too hard about it. So here's the problem. These aren't the same game. Sure, it looks like the same game. They've agreed to play Dungeons & Dragons, but it's not. They've just fooled one another and themselves into thinking it is. Consider this. Chess and checkers are played on the same board, but you'll rarely find yourself in a situation where you've set up your chess pieces across from your opponent, and they're setting up their checkers pieces. And if you do this for whatever ungodly reason, and if you ever find yourself in this position, you probably don't move your e2 pawn forward and start playing. But if you're playing D&D, this happens all the time, constantly. Part of the reason for this is that we've built up a certain mythology around D&D that leads us astray. Let's talk about 2 of them. Join me around the fire, friends. Pull up a seat and let the scales fall from your eyes. D&D is role-playing. Role-playing is D&D. D&D is the universal role-playing medium. You can do anything in D&D. The only limit is your own imagination. Want to play a game about students attending a school for wizardry? Let's play a game of D&D about it. Want to play a game about high-stakes political intrigue in a city-state on the brink of war where you're the advisors to the Serene Doge? Let's play a game of D&D about it. I really shouldn't have to explain what's wrong with this, but I guess I do, because a large segment of our hobby wholeheartedly, unironically believes this. Why wouldn't they? But D&D is a game with rules designed to support a very specific gameplay experience. It's a game about dungeons. It's a game about certain genres of adventure. It has very granular rules about hitting monsters with specific kinds of polearms. When you smack a dragon with your glaive, you roll a d20 and you add your strength modifier, plus your proficiency bonus, plus 1 if it's a basic magic weapon, with advantage if the dragon cannot see you, or disadvantage if you're small, because a glaive has the heavy tag. And you compare the result to the dragon's AC, which can itself be affected by spells. But there's little room for arguments here. The dragon's armor class is 19 because it says that right here in the book. And if you roll 19 or higher, you get to roll your damage, which for a glaive is a d10, plus your strength modifier, plus your plus 1. A glaive does slashing damage, and some monsters have resistance to slashing damage. Or if you're using this glaive on a black pudding that is medium or larger, it can use a reaction to divide itself into 2 puddings, one size smaller than the original, dividing its health pool between them, but not if that would leave the child puddings with less than 10 hit points. Oh, also, a glaive is a reach weapon, so you can make that attack even if you're standing 10 feet away. And this attack uses up an action, unless you have the extra attack class ability, in which case you can make several attacks as a single action. You also have your bonus action, and you have your movement, but that might provoke an attack of opportunity from the dragon. But the dragon moving 5 feet back from you might not provoke an attack of opportunity if you're within 5 feet, because the dragon is still within your reach. You get it. And very little of this is subjective. 5 feet means 5 feet. The book says exactly what the weapon does. Now, consider a situation you might encounter in that intrigue game we suggested. You stand behind the throne of the Serene Doge. A messenger has arrived from a neighboring kingdom bearing news of a border skirmish between your polity's respective soldiers. The messenger conveys an accusation and demand for recompense. The Doge doubts their story, accusing the neighboring kingdom of deliberate provocation. You and he both know this is an attempt to secure a casus belli by underhanded means. Knowing that the Serene Republic's army is currently engaged on another front, you wish to advise the Doge to capitulate. For now, we must pick our battles, but by the next new moon, the army will have returned from the southern peninsula and will be in a fit state to defend against the hostile forces currently massed and fresh on the other side of the border. If the horns of war sound before then, we'll be in a dire situation. But the Doge burns with a righteous fury. The village that burned after the skirmish got out of hand was the very same village in which the Doge grew up many decades ago. It's personal. He orders his guards to seize the emissary. He's gonna do something foolish. You step forward, your tone urgent. Roll persuasion. But what's the DC? There's no equivalent of AC here, so it's loosey-goosey. Should that DC be modified by the fact that the Doge has a personal stake in the matter? Should your roll be modified by the fact that you are, in fact, the Republic's master of horse, known for your grasp of logistics? What if you, too, had also grown up in this ill-fated village on the borderlands, and so the Doge knows you understand his pain? What if you were on thin ice with the Doge after an unfortunate incident at the gala the previous night? What if you'd recently returned victorious from a critical campaign to defend the southern peninsula from a confederation of pirates? The game basically shrugs and gestures to the DM to make something up. What sounds reasonable? You got a 4? You curse your bad dice luck. You probably don't succeed. Does it matter that your modifiers add up to a plus 12 and so your total is 16? But a 4 is bad though. What if you didn't have the persuade skill at all, but you rolled a 15? That's a really good roll, so that's probably a success, right? For most of these kinds of rolls, you might as well be flipping a coin, and that's if the DM doesn't make you roll again, and again, and again, until you get a low enough roll that the Doge can dismiss your advice. There's no way of mechanically representing that you're considered an authority on matters of military logistics. There's no space on your character sheet to represent your reputation within the court. We have hit points in a prominently featured box to track exactly how close you are to passing out in a battle, but we have no number to represent the Doge's confidence, or to give any weight to his outrage that you would dare question his judgment in front of the emissary of a foreign power. And this is because D&D is not a game about intrigue. It's a game about slaying monsters and taking their stuff. It has rules for fighting. It has rules for traversing hostile environments. It has rules, sort of, for remaining undetected. It has rules for resting up and buying provisions and equipping tools, but the entire vast sprawling banquet of social interaction isn't something the game is really all that interested in, so you align it with a single roll that you kind of fudge based on vibes. Imagine the opposite. Imagine if instead it was the entire dungeon experience that was folded into a single roll with a fiat resolution. You set out to find the mythical grail of the Raven, and you roll your dungeon skill. There's no DC. You roll a 13 plus 5 for your modifiers. 18. The DM shrugs. Yeah, sure, whatever, that sounds good enough. You battle to the heart of the Blackwing Labyrinth and secure the Grail and return victorious. Dungeon conquered. Your weapons and armor and potions and whatever, it doesn't really matter. You restock in town, presumably. It's the same for young adult school adventures. You can do it, sure, but not well. Dungeons & Dragons wants you to get out there and do dungeons and slay dragons. It wants you to fight. It wants you to enter initiative and trade hit points. So your school experience will either have a distinctly American flavor, or you'll be playing against the grain of the system. Waterdeep Dragon Heist, for example, is a published adventure that makes for an excellent example of exactly this kind of thing. Dragon Heist is a bad adventure. Possibly even the worst adventure ever written for 5th edition. Let me explain. On the one hand, Dragon Heist has a lot going for it. It fleshes out Waterdeep in a way that is good and cool and deep. It has some really interesting villains and NPCs and elaborate schemes and lore. It even has a reference to Sean Connery in Zardoz. Amazing. But it also falls hard for the myth of the universal system. Dragon Heist doesn't want to be a game about what D&D is about. Dragon Heist wants to be a game about rebuilding and managing a tavern in your downtime while you and your newfound friends are slowly drawn into a thrilling tale of mystery and intrigue. D&D has almost no mechanics for a good 2/3 of all that, so it half-bakes them all. In a mystery narrative, a protagonist typically encounters a situation and finds a clue that brings them to a new situation in which they can find their next clue. But D&D doesn't deal with this gracefully, with these chains of clues, because the process of discovering the clue is going to be a roll, and you could fail that roll. Roll investigation, a 4, you find nothing. Or you roll again until you do. But in both cases, why roll at all? And that's a question that absolutely haunts Dragon Heist. A Kenku in cahoots with the Xanathar Guild has the Stone of Galore and is running through the streets with it. The Kenku is 60 feet away from the character at the start of the chase. If at any point the Kenku is incapacitated, another Kenku, previously hidden in the rain or fog, joins the chase, acting next in the initiative count. It suddenly appears, snatches the stone, and flees with it. Dragon Heist? What is this? This is a chase that just straight up doesn't matter. Chases are even an actual mechanic from 5th edition, but the adventure just can't do anything with them because it's trying to use a paintbrush to hammer in a nail. We need to reach the next location, so we can't go off the rails. If you find a way to stop the Kenku, then sir, a second Kenku has picked up the Stone of Galore. It just comes out of nowhere and breaks the initiative order wherever it needs to be. If you're doing the summer variant of the chase, then there's, wait for it, yet another magical corvid. If Williford is incapacitated, a raven abruptly swoops down, acting next in the initiative count. It snatches the stone and flees with it. If you manage to catch up with the burb, the chase just ends, but you don't get the stone. We just scene transition to the next location. And if you don't catch up with the burb, the chase ends anyway, but you don't get the stone. We just scene transition to the next location. Again, meaningless. It's the whole illusion of choice cow meme. When the characters are close to catching the Kenku, or when you want the chase to end, the creature ducks into an old tower. Proceed with Encounter 7, Old Tower. But this isn't necessarily because Dragon Heist is badly written, although that's also true. It's mainly because Dragon Heist is fundamentally fighting an uphill battle against its own system and has no tools with which to engage its own content. Dragon Heist wants to be a slice-of-life anime. It wants to be Sid Meier's Sim Tavern. It wants you to play a game that is principally about solving problems with physical force in a setting where that's illegal. Waterdeep is a city with a strong social contract, chock full of cops with a legal monopoly on violence, who are fictionally positioned on every other street to make sure people like you don't do D&D sorts of things in this D&D game. You have all these dozens of tools and techniques for slaying monsters and reducing hit point totals, hundreds of ways to chop someone's head off with a sword, and they're all considered assault. And you've got more or less one tool, a skill check, built on a foundation of sand and vibes for literally everything else. D&D is, at its core, a war game about dungeons, and while it remains D&D, it always will be. To believe others is to get caught in the spider's web, the propaganda that if you buy our product, it's the only one you'll ever need. I already hear you typing down there. But Elf, you might say, that's what homebrew is for. Sure, you don't have these intrigue mechanics or school year mechanics, so you just homebrew them. Homebrew a social system, and like, what other game expects you to do this? Sure. You could play a game of chess that's about toxic Yuri and enemies to lovers magical girls getting into dramatic space battles between single-seat fighter craft in a dizzying superstructure of a Dyson sphere with which an unseen alien power is slowly and inscrutably enclosing the sun. All you'd have to do is homebrew some house rules for chess that support complex relationships and space dogfighting in Dyson spheres. But if you want to do that effectively, you're not making a few quick patches to the rules, you're writing your own game. You're not playing chess at that point. You're playing your game that you designed to accommodate the story you want to tell about a magical girl desperately struggling for intimacy as they contemplate the meaning of life and the future of human existence in a cold and uncaring universe. D&D gets away with it because there are already so many almost pathological expectations regarding divisions of labor in play culture, with one player both pedestalized as a god king whose word is law and simultaneously expected to do all the legwork. We mythologize the DM that makes a floor map of every building in town because, well, the players might go into any one of them. We shy away from questioning it because, well, isn't that the way role-playing games are supposed to work? This is especially tragic because there are games that exist that you could play exactly the thing I just said. Go play Girl by Moonlight, written by Andrew Gillis and published by Evil Hat Productions. You won't regret it. Let's return to Sam Smorkle. The players who want to talk to Sam Smorkle and the DM who wants them to talk to the man with the crown of bone and blade, they're not playing the same game. They probably agreed to sit down and play a game of D&D, but they didn't talk to each other about what that means exactly. This is kind of like agreeing to have dinner and then, without further discussion, beelining directly to your favorite restaurant and ordering ghost pepper squid sashimi dusted in ground peanuts for everyone. Maybe you know that none of your buddies are allergic to peanuts, but, like, do you though? Has it ever come up before? Do they all enjoy pushing the limits of extremely spicy as much as you do? Are they all down to eat squid raw? Are any of them vegan? This is like agreeing to watch a movie, and then, without further discussion, putting on your DVD of Hostel 2 while everyone else on the couch thinks they're going to be watching a rom-com. It's a failure of communication. It happens because we're under the impression that you can go to a drive-thru and order a meal called D&D for everyone. You can put D&D into the DVD player, and everyone will be happy because that's what they wanted, right? Although D&D isn't a universal system, neither is it a singular experience. It sort of wants to be. Its mechanics give it a shape where you do the things there are rules for. A dungeon crawl, downtime in town. There's a sort of vanilla D&D experience. You could play one of the official modules, for example. They're pretty close to what you want D&D as a system to be, right? Right? Or you could have the misfortune of playing Waterdeep Dragon Heist. There's a bit of a meme in the D&D community where a group will say they had a really great session and they didn't touch the dice once. For some, the point of this meme is to mock those groups or to argue about whether or not these groups are really playing D&D. But for some groups, this is a specific point of pride. They got deep into character, they explored a fantastic world, they met NPCs, they made purchases, they described the mouth-watering meals that they ate and had deep conversations about their innermost emotional vulnerabilities. You don't necessarily need dice or the D&D system for any of that. And freeform role-playing, when you allow yourself to get lost in it, is incredibly fun. Don't believe me? Try a LARP sometime. But look at where we're at. For all the arguments about whether this is or isn't D&D, for our purposes here, this is D&D. Without getting into the nitty-gritty of whether rules can structure the space of possibilities and inspire freeform roleplay without explicit invocation, players will agree to a game of D&D, sit down, do this, never touch dice, and faithfully report that they've played a session of D&D. Who am I to argue? On the other hand, if you sign up for a game of D&D, you might be signing up for a really gritty dungeon crawl where you're expected to make decisions as if it were playing a video game. The fun comes from solving the puzzle. Oh, an 8-legged lizard? That's a basilisk. I don't look directly at it. I whip out a mirror. That fiend-looking thing probably has fire immunity, so I hold my fireball for the next pack. The corridor with the hexagonal flagstones? I push down on them in turn with my 10-foot pole before proceeding. You might even talk in terms of tanking and pulls and packs, terms that come from MMO culture rather than as characters. You might be trying to math out AC and saves from your knowledge of the monster manual. Heck, your characters may not even speak to one another as characters at all. So, like, the crunchy dungeon crawl and the never touch the dice freeform roleplay are also very different experiences, though it's not uncommon to do both during the same campaign. The design encourages it by, in essence, being two games stapled together. You run around role-playing and making skill checks, and then you roll for initiative. It's sort of a through line of both the design and play culture to think of these experiences like a buffet. And D&D play culture, being so heavily influenced by popular actual plays, mythologizes the idea of having one's cake and eating it. That D&D will be a singular experience because it is all things. Your game will be a bagel with everything. Sam Smorkle is the promise of one game. The edgelord with the crown of bone and blade is the promise of another. Actual plays promise us these games can coexist, that they're the same game. We can have all the D's nuts jokes we want and throw cream pies at the city guards and steal the mayor's socks. And then we can do the bit about how the land is under demon occupation. Each family must offer up their firstborn before their 13th birthday to be impaled upon the spokes of the engine of pain. And your character must comfort their timid nephew as he's led towards the engine, surrounded by more demons than you could possibly hope to defeat. And as his resolve flickers, and he tearfully begs you to save him, Sam Smorkle hits him in the face with a cream pie. Sometimes, when you put everything in the stew pot, it just tastes rancid. Actual plays often manage to make it work because they're an artificial environment. They can coordinate among their players to finely tune the tone at any one moment, because they're typically not for the players. They're for you. So the lesson here is that if some players are pulling in one direction and some players are pulling in the other, this isn't just an inalienable, inevitable part of the process. This isn't some cosmic truth about role-playing. It's a sign that you need to start talking to one another about what you want out of your games. Because the real everything bagel is a nothing bagel. So how do we fix this? Fortunately for us, a few steps can go a long way. Good roleplay is a lot like a good relationship, because roleplay is a form of usually non-romantic intimacy. The more you pour into it, the more you will get out of it. But that makes you vulnerable, and therefore demands trust. And if you're going to build trust, good communication is essential. Someone going unheard or misinterpreted is a recipe for bitterness down the line. That isn't to say that you need to trust to roleplay. You can roleplay with complete strangers, but trust and communication are the key to unlocking vistas of roleplay that we can easily deprive ourselves of, that we might not even be aware of. Because when we don't feel safe enough to be vulnerable, we often turn to a trusty stopgap for puncturing tension that can be used unilaterally. Humor. Goofs. Our metaphorical ejector seat. We'll be getting into a scene, the tension will build, and we'll find ourselves trust-falling into the arms of our fellow players, and we get scared by the possibility of being so vulnerable. The mortifying ordeal of being known. The existential terror of being cringe. And so we'll throw out a D's nuts joke, and laugh and breathe a sigh of relief. Don't worry, friends, I don't really care about you. I don't really care about this game. I'm cool because I don't care. Caring would be cringe. And at the end of the road, at the end of every road, we meet Sam Smorkle. And Sam Smorkle is not the real villain of this tale. In fact, he's kind of a savior figure. Because, hey, we're not sure if we trust this DM, right? The hooded man with the crown of bone and blades seems kind of like they might be a cringe edgelord. He probably has a katana. We're probably going to get sucked into some bad emo fanfiction if we talk to him, right? What if we don't want to visit the DM's magical realm? That's on the DM, who has spent so much time building a railroad car, but clearly almost no time asking their players if they even want to use it to travel. The promise of Sam Smorkle is that he will take you by the hand and ask nothing of you. Goblin D's nut! Thank you to my patrons and YouTube members, who you should be seeing on the screen right about now. I hope you enjoyed our little foray into non-lore Smorkle content. More to come next month.